This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, Detroit sports fans? Welcome to the Fan Report, a show made by fans for fans, powered by the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. I'm Nick, and joining us once again today is our boy Andrew's going to give us this week's topics.
The Pistons GM search is reportedly underway. We go through some potential candidates, courtesy of Detroit News and MLive, and we give you who we would like to see run the front office. We'll also get some movie news in the mix. It's the Fan Report.
Okay, well, that's a good start to the podcast.
We got the intro done.
Yay. Only took 2 takes this time, unlike last week. How many takes did we take last week?
At least 5.
5 sounds about right. So, obviously,
you mumbled a few times, and I mumbled a few times. We're like, all right, just keep redoing it.
So obviously, this week the Pistons announced that they wanted to look at the possibility of hiring a GM. I don't blame them. I've been long asking them to hire a GM. I have always thought that I don't know how you're going to build a winning basketball team without one. I feel a GM is obviously very crucial to building of a winning sports team and organization. And the Pistons have just decided they weren't going to go that route. They were just going to say, I'm going to be single for a while, and we're just going to have a little side piece as an advisor, and that's Stefanski.
It's peculiar timing. It's an interesting route to go, but the fact they're doing it now kind of made me think of something, and that is that maybe they just wanted to keep Ed Stefanski on to kind of clean the slate a little bit and get rid of get rid of all the bloated contracts and basically prep the way for the new GM who's going to come in and actually build the team.
Which actually is a fairly good point, because you really think about it. Any GM that would have been hired a few years ago probably wouldn't have a job right now.
Yeah.
It's the team's not winning. Fans would have been unhappy. So it basically is a situation where the Pistons knew they weren't going to be any good. They needed to just bottom out and get rid of the bad contracts on the books and start fresh. And don't ruin someone's career by doing that. I mean, they're fifth worst in the league.
This year, finally.
Right. That's what I mean. They did it this year. They're 5th worst in the league, and they were on track to be a little bit worse than that. I also will say that the timing is peculiar in the sense of there was a possibility of them still having basketball to play. So why are we talking off-season situations?
That is true.
With that being a possibility, I have a feeling
that they heard from Adam Silver at that.
I'm pretty sure I have a feeling that they kind of knew that they were not going to be involved in any restart of the NBA season or or playoff situation. So. I feel like they were pretty confident that they weren't going to be playing, so they felt comfortable in putting it out there that they're going to be looking for a GM. And now that you bring up, because I've always been on the premise of better late than never with this. Yeah. That's how I felt since I first saw the news drop, and that's how I still feel. But now that you bring up the point you just made kind of is clicking some things in my head a little bit. It makes a lot of sense, because it doesn't unnecessarily tarnish someone's career, and it makes it a little bit and it makes it not a little but a lot easier for someone to come in, and maybe they've had their
makes it more attractive.
It does. And also on top of that, maybe they've had a guy in mind that they've wanted for a while, and they've said, I don't want to come into this situation and deal with what you have until it's clean and ready for me to actually build something. And maybe that's what they were building. It was what they were working towards, is getting it into a situation where, hey, let's tear this thing down to the studs, and then we can bring our guy in. He can be a guy that maybe can convince some players to come to this town, and we can make something happen from there. So I like your thinking.
Fingers crossed that's true. And they weren't just, procrastinating.
Right, which is entirely possible. I mean, this is Detroit sports in 2020/2019/2018. So it's entirely possible. It's been a miserable few years, so who knows? But either way, I like your thinking there. I do. I think
Thank you.
It's very interesting. Good thoughts.
So before we get into actual candidates, so I do have a question I want to pose, because looking through the candidate list, and I was basically looking through MLive and Detroit News, and I know The Athletic also put one out. But do you, because there's a lot of names that are former players in these candidate lists, do you think there's any advantage for an organization to have a former player be the GM?
In all honesty, not when it comes down to it. We've seen several former players just absolutely fail miserably as GMs, i.e. Isaiah Thomas. He's a very glaring example of that. And you can even argue to a point towards the end, maybe even Larry Bird a little bit, although he did have some
Larry
success
Bird did have
with
a
the
good,
Pacers.
He
Did
good
have
start.
success with the Pacers.
But then you look at guys like Danny Ainge, Jerry West, they've had fantastic
success, obviously. But either way, being a player does not always constitute success as a member of the front office, in particular the GM position. I will say, though, in a situation like Detroit where it is fairly difficult to get free agents to come here, having a player having a former player in your front office as the GM may make it, especially one that's respected, may make it a little bit more attractive to a free agent to come here, because that makes the impending free agent look at the situation and say, okay, he knows what I've been through. He's been on my side of the table before. Maybe he'll have my back a little bit more than someone who's just a suit. So there is a little bit more of an attractive nature to having a former player as your GM, based on that right there, that a former player that is now a GM has been on the other side of the table and isn't just going to try to push a raw deal to try to get someone to sign here. It's going to be a situation that may work out for both parties.
You bring up a very good point, because I think it's more of like, I think it gives you the players, I think it gives the players more of this trust factor between the players and the front office, because, and it brings you back to when they were airing The Last Dance over the last couple months or month or so, and how basically Jerry Krause basically alienated that whole team by the end. And you wonder if a former player GM would have handled things similarly, or if he would have been like, "Hey, Scotty, for example, I've been in your shoes. I know you've been underpaid your whole career. Like, I'm going to work on getting you a new contract. Just bear with me. Like, stick it out for me, please." And maybe there's some underlying trust that a player goes in and just has this innate confidence in someone who's been in their position before. So you do bring up a good point,
right? And that's something that I feel like is a plus, is a positive of bringing in a former player. Now, there are negatives to bringing in former players. They don't fully understand the business of basketball. They may err on the side of
too strongly on the side of players, and end up creating some some bad deals. I mean, you could end up with another situation like a Josh Smith, where he got way overpaid to come here. Or a situation like a Charlie Villanueva or a Ben Gordon again, who got way overpaid to come here, and it ended up destroying the franchise for a decade or more. So Agreed.
If you err too far on the side of the player, then you hurt the business of basketball, and that's how you end up in bad cap situations. So there are negatives and positives to bringing in a former player, but it just depends on who the player is, because some are going to do the job better than others, obviously. Some understand the business of basketball better than others, and some are all about me and all about the player and not so much about the organization. So you got to find yourself a nice middle ground with someone there. So I like the idea. However, you gotta play your cards right when going after GM, especially when you have as much cap space as the Pistons do. That's where I kind of almost feel like it may be a better decision to go on the side of someone who understands the business of basketball a little bit more than a former player may. But again, it just depends on who the former player is, and it depends on who the guy, who the suit is. It all depends on who we're talking about here. And we'll find out. So I know you've got some names. I know you're itching to tell me them. So let's hear them.
I got 8 candidates, and 5 of them are actually former players. So, and
That's
a few of them with Detroit ties as well. So I want to get the non-player names out there.
Well, obviously those are going to be less fun.
So I want to get those done. So those 3 are Michael Zarin, who is currently the assistant GM for the Celtics. He started as an intern and moved his way all the way up to assistant GM, which I guess kind of bodes well for his basketball knowledge, just looking at his career progression, maybe. The other one is Troy Weaver, who is the VP of basketball ops for the Thunder. Now, we know the Thunder have had some, and he's been there for the last 12 years. We know they've had some really good growth over that time.
Before you list them all, let's take them one by one and kind of give our thoughts on each one.
Yeah, I was gonna do the first three, but yeah, we can go one by one.
Let's go one by one to start with, just so I don't forget the names. What was the first name?
Yeah. So Michael Zarin. He's the assistant GM for the Boston Celtics. He's also their legal counsel, by the way.
Interesting. The city of Detroit sure loves their Boston front office members, don't they?
Yes.
You know what this situation screams to me? Exactly what the Lions did with Bob Quinn.
I knew it was coming.
Exactly what the Lions did with Bob Quinn. It was a guy who rose up the ranks in the New England Patriots system, starting as a scout and then ending up as someone in the front office, either a head scout or an assistant GM. I don't remember what he was with New England. That's kind of a very similar situation with this guy from the assistant GM of the Boston Celtics, and it makes you wonder, much like the situation with Bob Quinn, how much of that was Bill Belichick and their front office versus just him. And his ability to find the guys that create a winning organization. I'm going to say the same for his name slipped in my mind. Michael Zarin, is that right?
Michael Zarin.
Michael Zarin. I was close. I'm going to say the same thing for him. There's so many similarities there. A guy who rose through the ranks, which you could argue is a good thing, but that could also mean he's just an organization guy. He's a Boston
especially
Celtics
with a guy as big as Danny Ainge at the head. Like,
exactly.
You wonder how much influence has she had in their success over the last few years.
Exactly. So you look at Boston and the young talent they've brought on board and the veteran talent they've brought in, and you say, okay, how much of that was Danny Ainge? And a bunch of yes guys, which Bill Belichick's probably got a bunch of those as well, and Bob Quinn may have been one of them. So how much of this was Danny Ainge and how much of this was actually Michael Zarin and his ability to put together a team? And that's what makes me worry about a name like that.
Yeah.
Just because of that.
I will point out, Rod Beard does make it a point to specify that Michael Zarin's specialty is statistical analytics and strategic planning. Sounds a lot like Daryl Morey to me, but I don't know if that gives a little extra oomph to the name. But I felt that was important to at least highlight before.
I mean, I like a guy. It's 2020. Sports have changed. Sports have changed. We've every single sport's gone are the ways of, I don't know, gone are the old ways, and in are the ways of the analytics and the statistical analytics, and the 3 is better than the 2 if you make it at a 38% clip because it's worth more points, and that's the way that teams are built now. So obviously that is a plus in my mind, because your successful teams are the ones that are using analytics, just like
you're not
in baseball.
You're not going to see a Drummond, Monroe, Josh Smith front court again with an analytics guy at the head.
No, I really don't think you're ever going to see that again, at least not in this era of basketball. That's for damn sure.
It still makes no sense to this day. I still have no idea what was going on there. All right. Next name is Troy Weaver. Again, he's from the Oklahoma City Thunder. He is the VP of basketball ops. He's been there for 12 years. He also served as the assistant GM for 8 years as well. Now, the Thunder, again, over the last 12 years, have had very, very, very good growth. They've been a successful organization, successful team. Do you like this name?
He's one that's... How long has he been there?
12 years.
He's been there 12 years?
He's also really good in terms of player personnel stuff. He did draft prep and free agency with Sam Presti, and he was also the director of player personnel and head scout for the Jazz for a time as well.
So this is one that's a little bit intriguing, just because...
A different flavor, but also...
It's a guy who has been at the top in terms of player personnel, being a director of player personnel for a while, on a team that drafted some very good talent in James Harden, in Russell Westbrook, in Kevin Durant. You had
I wonder what years he was with the Jazz. If he was responsible for taking... No, there's no way he was responsible for taking Mitchell too soon.
No. But I'm also a little bit concerned with this one. And there's a lot of positives with him just because of the fact that he has some winning pedigree and some success as a top guy in a player personnel role. But my worries are, while they did do a very good job at drafting some very big names and developing those big names,
they were terrible at building a team around them.
They were terrible at building a team around them, and also terrible at keeping it together and making it work. You obviously saw essentially that OKC team with that big 3 implode entirely because they couldn't keep them happy. They couldn't make it work. And then you ended up seeing Durant leave. You saw Harden leave. You saw Russell Westbrook leave. Ultimately, it's a situation that is a little bit concerning in that regard. Obviously, they've made the play to bring back some talent into that organization, young talent as well. So, and they look like they could potentially be on the right track to rebuild, but we have yet to really see entirely how that's going to go. So, there's positives and negatives with this one, and I tend to err on the side of caution with guys who have been around for a while, because some of those guys tend to be stuck in their old ways and make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I do wonder how much he had to do with the lack of chemistry on that team.
Probably not a lot. Probably not a lot.
I do see what you're saying. Like, there are people that can get so focused on he's just a good player rather than how does he fit the team as a whole. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. When people take best player available way too seriously.
Right. And the fact that they were never able to build a championship around that, enough to build a championship with that team, with that core three. You put that core three on another team that with a good GM, you give Danny Ainge that core three, and it's not if, it's how many he wins.
Exactly.
So that's something that also kind of concerns me a little bit, is can he truly build a team so much as just get 3 superstars here and hope it wins?
Yeah. All right. The last non-player name is Milt Newton. He's currently the assistant GM for the Bucks. He was also the actual general manager for the Minnesota Timberwolves from 2013 to 2016. That means he was responsible for dealing Kevin Love to Cleveland to get then number 1 pick Andrew Wiggins. He was responsible for drafting Karl-Anthony Towns. So I don't know how much stock I'm going to put in that, because he was also number 1 pick. I mean, how often can you miss on that? But when he was with the Bucks, he's also done a lot to help the team, including hiring Coach Budenholzer in 2018, who's proved a very, very strong coach for them. This is a name I actually like, probably the most out of the 3 non-player names that we've discussed.
I like him as well. I don't get all that excited about the Timberwolves experience, because when it comes to drafting number 1 overall, unless you royally screw it up, you should end up looking pretty good no matter what.
Yeah, you should end up getting Karl-Anthony Towns, but I do like the Kevin Love trade. I do like
that Kevin Love trade. I do think they got the better end of that deal. Well, they should have. In all honesty, I think the Cavs at this point got the better
Everyone
end
and
of
their mama thought Andrew Wiggins was like the next coming. So.
Right. He just didn't turn out to be that guy, and you could argue that's more of an effort on his end. But and Karl-Anthony, honestly, though, thinking about it, Karl-Anthony Towns also is a guy who's hindered by his own effort levels and his own development. So maybe it is something in-house that's a problem. Maybe that's something that we need to look at and say, maybe he has a problem seeing the issues that are in front of him, and he has a refusal to get rid of certain guys in terms of coaching personnel and team and player development personnel, that he's not seeing the problems with them, and that's been part of the stunting of the growth of guys like Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns. So that is one thing you could really look at. I mean, yes, that's a deep dive and may even be a bit of a reach, but either way, he does have an ability to find talent. Obviously, the Milwaukee Bucks are a very fine team that he's helped orchestrate. That's an organization that has built a winning pedigree around a superstar in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and his development's obviously been fantastic. But they've also been able to build a team, and they've built a lot of success around a team, and they built that team mainly on the back of analytics and what works and guys who just fit together. And bringing in Brook Lopez is a great example of that. He fits so well with that team. Bringing in and working with the team that they have and bringing in certain guys and the player personnel that they have. I actually agree with you. This is probably one of my
very well-built team.
It is a well-built team. It's a team that's well-rounded, very well-built. But I'm curious to hear, more of your thoughts on him, considering he is the favorite of your 3.
I agree, but I do think that when you're talking about a draft pick, we have to take it in context. So when you look at that draft, 3 of the top 4 players picked were Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Kristaps Porzingis. I think you can make a legitimate argument that D'Lo or Kristaps, you may rather have them on your team right now.
I can't necessarily disagree with that. especially in terms of chemistry. Now, D'Lo obviously has his issues in the locker room. There is that.
Yes.
And Kristaps Porzingis has the injury risk. So there's negatives with all of them. Karl-Anthony Towns has probably been, honestly, they've all been disappointing in certain ways. I think Cat is the one that honestly pisses me off the most because he's got such incredible talent. And he could be, honestly, one of the best bigs in the entire... He could be the best big in the league, arguably. He could be up there with Anthony Davis if he just applied himself and made it happen cared about playing defense, but he doesn't. And he just hasn't developed into the superstar.
He's still all he wants, but if he's going to be a turnstile on the defensive end, what's the point?
Right, he's still a fantastic player, especially offensively. Yeah. He's just not quite able to reach that pinnacle point that the top tier bigs have. But D'Lo is a guy who we saw his development skyrocket as soon as he left LA. We've seen him turn into a fantastic player, and then Kristaps Porzingis, we saw what he could be if only he could stay healthy. So, honestly, take your pick your poison with the three. You can make the argument Cat is the guy that is most successful out of that, but you can also make the argument out of the other two. So
exactly,
that's
why I don't want to put too much stock in. He drafted Karl-Anthony Towns, but basically what I'm getting at, it's simple with my thoughts on this guy is, to me, he has the most experience, or I should say the best experience of the non-player names. And his resume is, to me at least, you can nitpick a little bit, but it's hard to poke any real legitimate holes for me.
That's fair.
It's a simple
my big negative was one I personally even admitted it was a bit of a reach, because you can't really say that was definitively the issue. Not being able to see the fact that there was an issue with player development and bringing in someone else to fulfill that role. I can't say that was the issue with Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't know. I'm not close enough to the Timberwolves situation to know that.
It is kind of weird that they both struggle from the same exact issue, but
which you could argue maybe that's maybe they haven't found the right guy to push them hard enough. But
that could be too.
Either way, I've seen players with the Milwaukee Bucks develop quite well, though. Malcolm Brogdon was a guy who developed quite well before for the Bucks, and they've had talent developed there. So I don't know. I can't really say that's an issue over in Milwaukee. So either way, I kind of agree with you that he is the name that of the non-players that I do like the most, just because of player or talent recognition. That's the word, term I'm looking for. Talent recognition is there with him, so I like that one there. And it looks like he has an ability to orchestrate a team and build a team, a winning team, and build it with the pieces like a puzzle that fit together.
All right, so I'm going to start off with a player name that's probably the least notable player name, and it's one of the two player names that's only on one list rather than two lists, and that is Mark Price.
Okay. Mark Price is a name I've heard of.
Where are my notes on him?
Nice. Shall we come back to that one?
Sorry, not Mark Price, Mark Hughes. That's why I couldn't find the notes on him.
Okay, Mark Hughes. There we go. That is not a name I've heard of.
Jesus. All right. Mark Hughes. He's the assistant GM for the Clippers. And he's also worked with the Knicks as director of player personnel. He is a former Piston. He was also on Michigan's 1989 NCAA championship team. But reportedly, his role with the Clippers has recently been expanded, and he seems to be being groomed to move into their GM role. So they must see something they like in him. I'm not entirely sold on it, because I feel like the Clippers have treaded water for so long. This year seems to be looking like it could be their year, but they just treaded water for so long that I don't know if I'm entirely sold.
I'm gonna agree with you. I'm not sold on this one, and reason being, I'm gonna kind of focus on your point of treading water for so long. This is an organization that I feel like has gotten up to very close to the peak of the mountain, but never been able to reach it.
Yep.
How long has he been with the Clippers organization?
That's a great question. Let me look it up.
Okay. While you do that, I'll give more thoughts here. I don't know if he was ever involved in the whole Lob City scenario with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, but that was a team that just seemed like it didn't have enough built around it. You had a big three, but not enough built around it to make them a championship team. And then you move on into the organization when they decided they wanted to try to rebuild. And I thought they did a good job at orchestrating the right trades to get them the draft picks to help to launch the rebuild and spring load the rebuild. And they did a good job there. So is that. They recognized the need to rebuild, and they recognized a way to do it effectively. And then they turned that young talent around into a couple of superstars, basically, along with some other talent that they have on their roster as well. So
here's a plus for the Clippers, or for Mark Hughes, I should say, is he joined in August 2017, which is basically the start of that rebuild you're talking about.
Okay, so maybe he's a guy who can help launch a rebuild for an organization, and that is something that does make him a little bit more attractive. I
had assumed he was with the Clippers for longer than that, but I guess not.
Apparently not. That kind of helps me a little bit more, because if he was involved in that Lob City scenario, I think that's something that would kind of be a detractor a little bit, because I just didn't like the way that team was built, and the fact they just never could get over the hump kind of tells me that they just weren't built well enough. And then you have but he wasn't involved in that, so you have a situation where he helped bring those draft picks in. He helped turn them into young talent and movable and assets. That's the one thing that is lacking here with the Pistons organization, is we have a lack of assets and movable assets, also playable assets. We don't have enough of either, and he was able to get a bunch of movable assets with the Clippers organization that were also playable as well, and turn them into Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and be an organization that could be a championship contender this year. So I like what he's done there. It is something that is attractive. I don't know, because this could also be another situation where how much of this was the GM of that organization, how much of this involved Jerry West, how much, if he is
that's the grain of salt you got to take all this with, because these are outside of the last guy we talked about.
Because that is another organization where the GM does have a ton of power, and the up top personnel has a lot more power and say, much like the Danny Ainge situation.
Yes.
And Jerry West, if I recall, is the orchestrator of most of that down there. So that's something you got to kind of be wary of. But if he is getting an increased role, maybe it's a situation where they see some hope in this guy, and maybe he could be something there. But if that's the case, I don't know what it would take for the Pistons to convince him to come here as opposed to staying with the Clippers organization down in LA. So that might be a little bit of a tough grab as well.
All right, let's move on to another player. This player is going to sound familiar to Pistons fans because he was considered for a front office role just two seasons ago. And that's Brent Barry. He's currently the VP basketball ops for the Spurs.
Guy who hit several big threes on the Pistons. I remember this name very well.
And he joined the Spurs front office basically you're thinking of John Barry, I think.
No, John Barry, I said against the Pistons.
Oh, I thought you said for the Pistons.
No,
I'm sorry.
Against the Pistons. I remember Brent Barry very well. John Barry, I also remember. John Barry was a dude that looked like he was about 55 with
looked like he was your dad out there playing basketball.
Pretty much. The most non-basketball looking basketball player.
But he joined the Spurs. He's very, very limited on experience. He joined the Spurs front office in 2018. And he basically works on evaluating pro players, college scouting, draft prep, strategic planning, basically player personnel. But his official title is VP of Basketball Ops.
How do you feel about it?
This is probably my least favorite of the player options, just because of how limited his experience is. And basically the Spurs in 2018 were already good anyways. So I don't know how much real experience he has actually building a team. This one doesn't seem to make much sense for me.
I'm going to agree with you because the Spurs are kind of on their way down, and he's been a part of that. Brent Barry is a name that obviously Pistons fans, at least in our age range and a little bit older, are going to recognize. I think the Pistons are it's just not a fit for the Pistons right now. The Pistons are in a situation where I feel like a little bit more experience in the role as an assistant GM or as a GM would be very valuable because of the amount of cap space they have and where they are in a very fragile state as an organization for the future of this team. There's a lot of room for error here. There's a lot of opportunities to make mistakes with what they have available to them in terms of draft picks and a high draft pick and a draft that has a lot of talent up near the top, as well as the amount of money they have available in free agency to them, as well as to make trades. So there's a lot of potential assets that the Pistons have and can use that can end up coming back to haunt them. So I would like to see a little bit more of an experienced guy. Mind you, I know that Brent Barry is underneath that Spurs umbrella right now and probably soaking up all of the knowledge that you could ever want.
It'd be another classic Lions-Patriots play. I mean,
right. I don't know that this one quite is a fit as of right now.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And in the same ballpark as our next player, who's Shane Battier. He's another guy that
I thought he still played.
No.
I could have sworn I saw this dude on the floor this year.
He's another guy the Pistons courted for the front office in 2018, around the same time they were trying to court Brent Barry. And he's currently the VP of basketball
that's why I remember
analytics.
his name in the news. That's why. Okay. Wasn't because he's playing.
He's currently the VP of basketball development analytics for Miami.
That's an interesting one.
Again, he started in a front office role around the same time Brent Barry did. And this is the same scenario. This is a guy that I feel is yes, I would love to bring a Detroit native back to Detroit, sure. But this is a guy that feels way too light on experience.
Lack of experience.
Seriously consider him.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree. It's just another situation much like Brent Barry where, sure, he's in a great organization in Miami with a lot of good mentors there and an ability to build talent and bring in guys. But you could also argue the city of Miami is a big attractor there. But either way, lack of experience with Shane Battier. And I know he's a player that was, as far as I am concerned, and as far as I know, was well respected in the league. But either way,
very well respected.
A lack of experience here could come back to haunt him. I like Shane Battier better than Brent Barry, and I like his potential for the future better than Brent Barry as a GM. I just don't think it's a fit with the Detroit Pistons as of right now.
Yeah, I feel like Shane Battier has a lot of connections throughout the league with player personnel because, again, he was in the league for a long time, and he was, as you say, he was a player that a lot of players respected.
Right, and that's not to say Brent Barry wasn't.
Yeah, no.
But the name Shane Battier is a lot more of a household name than Brent Barry was.
All right, now we get to our last two, both former Pistons, both from the going to work era. First name is Tayshaun Prince. He was promoted to VP of President of Basketball Operations with the Memphis Grizzlies last year, and he's also a special advisor to the general manager. And currently, his main thing is
he's at
player personnel evaluation development. Yeah, but this is a front office guy, former beloved Piston, and unlike the other guy we're going to talk about, this guy actually is starting to get a little bit of experience, but no more experience than the other two players we talked about.
Now,
but how would you like to see Tayshaun Prince come back?
I would love to see Tayshaun Prince come back into the city of Detroit, not necessarily as our GM, though. I think there is a little bit of lack of experience. He does have a lot of respect in this city as well as in the league. But I would like to see him.
Or is he too mild-mannered to be a GM?
No, it's fine. I have no issue with that because I feel like there's a little bit of a decorum that oozes respect out of that.
You don't want that Mark Cuban style? No, he's an owner. What am I talking
He's an
about?
owner. But I still think he makes a lot of the decisions for the Mavs personnel, though. But either way,
I'd agree.
I like Tayshaun Prince. However, the Memphis experience doesn't scream success to me because that is an organization that is not good right now. They've gone through a lot of turmoil, obviously with the Mike Conley situation, where that you could argue was kind of blundered a little bit. You look at trading Marc Gasol away and bringing in Jonas Valanciunas, and they brought in Jonas Valanciunas in that Marc Gasol trade, didn't they? If I remember right, they did. Yeah.
So, yes.
And his essentially falling off the face of the earth as a result in terms of Jonas Valanciunas. I don't love the moves that they have made in that organization. I think Tayshaun Prince has a lot of potential. I actually like the name a lot. I think he's a very intelligent guy who has a potential to be a good front office member. I would just like to see him come in as more of an assistant GM type guy or an advisor type role to get his feet a little bit more wet, and hopefully a situation where the Pistons are in a winning territory to maybe eventually take on the GM role long term. But in the immediate here and now, I'd like to see him more as a guy that comes in as an assistant GM and just kind of learns more of the process in a winning situation if the Pistons get to that point.
Let me add some color to this real quick, because we know that his specialty with the Memphis Grizzlies right now is scouting, player personnel development. And I just want to look at who they've drafted in the time he's been there. And you're looking at names like Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson, who's been fantastic for them, and John Morant. Like they have had a very good draft record.
Now, mind you, John Morant was a no-brainer.
Yes.
How much credit can you really give for that one?
True. Was a no-brainer.
Right. Jaren
Jackson, Brandon Clark, not so much though.
Jaren Jackson was still looked at as a very high lottery pick. He is, and I believe he was taken number 4 overall.
No, Jaren Jackson was in the late single digits, I believe.
Was it? Okay. So either way, he was still a lottery pick that is looked at. That is one that you can look at as more of a grab. He's been quite good. And,
no, you're right. Sorry.
I was going to say, I thought he was top 5. I thought he was top 5. Right. So that is a situation where you are looking at it, maybe a no-brainer there, but also it's a good grab either way. The John Morant one, I don't know how much credit to give just because that's a no-brainer, and it was from day one. That was a guy who was looked at potentially going number 1 overall.
John Morant's a guy you can't miss on.
So... But Jaren Jackson is one, and then Brandon Clark is one as well that you can argue is something to look at as a positive too. So there are positives.
If you want
to look
the negative spin on Clark, you could say that he fell so far that it was a no-brainer to take him at the spot they were at. But
right, 100% agree there.
Which I remember me and you watching that draft live, and while we were recording our live, is Brandon Clark still on the board?
Right. But either way, I like Tayshaun Prince as a guy who can recognize young talent and maybe look to grab some scouts and also be a guy who's garnered some respect from fellow players in the league. But I'd like to see him come into Detroit in an assistant GM type role or director of scouting type role and work his way up from there.
Yeah. All right, and I think everyone knows.
Now, before you give this, well, actually, you know what? We'll talk about this one. Then I have one more name that I think could have some play in here. And mind you, I don't think it'll happen. However, I think it's a guy who it's an interesting name, and it does have Detroit ties.
Yep. The last name is Chauncey Billups,
which obviously this one everybody knows, and obviously
this is a guy that it feels like every fan wants him in the front office. Now the big knock against him is he doesn't have any front office experience.
Right, he does have analysis.
This is a guy that felt like he was cut out for a front office job while he was even still in the league. He oozes that kind of.
He just has that persona, that mentality. He looked like from the moment he got here, like he was either going to be a coach or front office personnel in the future for the Detroit Pistons. He's got so much basketball knowledge, so much leadership capabilities and leadership talent, I guess I'll call it, that he just oozes that mentality of a front office personnel member, especially as a GM and a guy who you look at and say, that dude's going to be a damn good GM someday. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of someone like Joe Dumars. I know a lot of people looked at Joe Dumars that way and whether or not he could potentially be something of the, front office personnel in the future. And look what he turned out to be. He ended up bringing a championship here to this city. So another guard as a front office member, another former guard on the Detroit Pistons and championship winning guard on the Detroit Pistons as a GM of this city. It's almost prophetic. Like it just fits.
if Chauncey were to get hired and then eventually win a championship, I think every former guard that finds success in Detroit is going to be rumored for a GM position. Just keep going with the flow.
As long as they win an NBA title.
Exactly. If they win a championship. But am I being biased by saying Chauncey is the guy I want? Yeah, 100%. I'm being a biased Pistons fan by saying that because he's the guy with no experience, the only guy with no experience on this list. But yeah, I fully admit I'm being biased towards my Pistons fandom and my love of that squad and my love of Chauncey in general.
In particular.
Yeah, for saying that he's my number one pick for GM, but I guess I don't think it's that crazy to think that he could be a great GM even though he doesn't have any experience. Now, question for you is, do you think he would do it?
I do. And I'll be straight up with you. I think this is what he's been waiting for. I think when I said earlier that I think the Pistons have found their guy a couple of years ago, and he said, I don't want to come into the situation that's here because I don't want to tarnish my reputation before I even get started. Yep. I think this is the guy that they've been looking at since, and this is the guy they bottomed out for. This is the guy that they tore it all down so that he can come in.
At the very beginning.
Right. This is the exact guy I was talking that I had in mind. This has been the guy all along, and they've just waited until they got all the bad contracts off the books and had something they could build with in terms of cap space as well as a good draft pick. Yeah. And that's exactly what Chauncey's going to come into the situation with, albeit also with some talent possibly on the roster in Blake Griffin, in Derrick Rose, possibly Christian Wood, and going forward from there. Now, I know I agree with you that this is also my favorite candidate of the bunch. And I know that I've said from the beginning of this whole segment that I want someone with experience. Maybe someone with experience would be better suited. And I'm going to contradict myself and say that into the terms of a player, of a person, and a personnel member like Chauncey Billups, I have a feeling that just the knowledge trumps the experience here. He's got so much basketball knowledge, so much respect in the league that he just fits in that role. And I feel like that just trumps that experience right there. And it can turn out to be an instant success, especially in this city. He is so cut out to be a GM of an organization in this town, especially obviously the Detroit Pistons, that I think it's just an instant, it's a hit the ground running type scenario. And Chauncey absolutely fits that mold and fits that mentality of what the Detroit Pistons are all about. We saw it when he was a player, and we saw how much he could potentially be a GM, and I think he'll fit in just perfectly and be the right guy for this organization. Absolutely. He is my favorite name, hands down. And again, like I said, I think he's been the guy all along with this organization, and that's why he was still an analyst for a little while. That's why he continued to be the analyst for a little while until he was ready to come back home and be the GM of the Detroit Pistons.
Yeah,
because it's not like he didn't have other offers or other potential GM situations for him to go into. Yeah,
because I remember him being courted by a few teams a couple years ago.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of interest in Chauncey Billups to be a GM of an organization. He chose to stay an analyst.
Yeah.
Why? Personally, I believe it's because he's always wanted to come back home here, and he's always wanted to be a GM of the Pistons in the future once the organization was ready for him. And now they are, and now it's time.
I will say if it weren't Chauncey, I do think my favorite name on this list is Milt Newton that we've discussed. He was the one who is the assistant GM for the Bucks. So I would say if we didn't go Chauncey, I'd pivot to Milt. And then it muddies from there for me. It muddies a little bit, and I become a little more indifferent.
I liked, I think it was Hughes. I liked him a little bit.
Mark Hughes, assistant GM for the Clippers.
I think I liked him a little bit. I think that
former Wolverine.
Yep, I think that one's a little bit of a tough grab. I liked him. My favorite one obviously is Milt Newton, like you said. That one is my top. Then I'd probably say in there would be Mark Hughes, as well as Tayshaun's one that is obviously intriguing just because he's a former Piston as well.
Imagine this. What if Chauncey did get hired and then hired Tayshaun as assistant GM?
Oh, God. Yes, please. Make it happen. Put it in writing.
Man, I'd love it. I would love it.
Now, I did mention I had one more name as someone I think is a possibility, and it's more of a dark horse. I don't think it'll happen, but it's a name I think people should be just thinking about. And it's a guy who is involved with the G League team of the Detroit Pistons, the Grand Rapids Drive, in terms of, I believe, ownership as well as in the front office as an executive, as a president of basketball operations or vice president of basketball operations. I can't remember his exact title. I'll look it up. But it's Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace is a guy who isn't someone you would look at as being that front office type guy, but he is someone who is involved in front office situations in the G League, in the Pistons organization. So he has a little bit of experience in that type of role in the front office of an organization, albeit not an NBA organization, but it is a professional basketball scenario where he is involved in it. And doing something along with that to kind of get the ins and outs of what it's all about and what he has to do. And he already also has a rapport with the current front office, Ed Stefanski, and Tom Gores as well, obviously.
Yeah.
As something that could allow a transition like that to be a little bit more seamless.
That is interesting.
Yes, he's the president of basketball personnel for the Grand Rapids Drive. That's what it is. Yeah. So it is one that I think could be looked at. It's a name that hasn't been brought up by pretty much anybody. So I would be very curious to see if his name starts to kind of sneak into the running a little bit to move over from Grand Rapids to Detroit and be the GM here as opposed to being the president of basketball operations over in Grand Rapids. So it is one that I'm kind of curious about.
I find that interesting. A third name from the Going to Work crew. I find it, and honestly, it says something about that team.
Bring them all in. Just bring them all in.
It says something about that team that 3 players are legitimate GM candidates.
Well, that team was just honestly bring back Richard Hamilton to be a shooting coach.
There you go.
Bring back.
Oh my God! Imagine Rashid
coach.
as the head coach.
Bring back Rashid to be the big man coach. I don't know, a forwards coach, a stretch forwards coach, a swingman type guy. Bring back Tayshaun to coach defense or be an assistant GM. Bring back Chauncey as your GM. Bring back Ben maybe as a head coach or whatever you want to do as something else in the front office. I don't care. Bring them all back.
Bring them all. That's an interesting name. I can't knock that, to be honest with you. I really can't.
I'm just curious to know how much...
Because that's another guy that has a lot of respect in the league, if you think about it.
Tons of respect in the league. I mean, dude won Defensive Player of the Year award how many times?
He had a monopoly on it, basically.
Right. Right. It wasn't him. It was Ron Artest, if I remember right. Or Bruce Bowen, I think, had some run in there, too. But either way, I think it's a guy who's knowledgeable, knows about the game of basketball. I think he's a situation, though, where a little bit of experience would be helpful. I don't quite feel the same about him in terms of the knowledge of basketball and the knowledge of what it takes to win in building an organization as Chauncey does. So Chauncey Billups is still my front runner. I just think the name Ben Wallace may kind of pop up a few times as we start to get closer to signing a GM and names start to come out of a hat. So I'd pay attention to that one a little bit too.
There you go. Yeah, so that's our quick rundown of potential GMs.
49 minutes is a quick rundown.
Real quick before we close out, I do want to touch on some movie news. It's one of those rare occasions nowadays where we actually have some movie news. And for those of you Martin Scorsese fans out there, his new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is based on a book, it's going to be starring DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. Apple TV pried it away from Paramount, promising Scorsese the full $200 million budget he's looking for, while Paramount was trying to bring down his budget. Apple TV promised him the full $200 million budget, and that is now going to be an Apple TV produced film. My question to you is, does this make you any more likely to subscribe to Apple TV?
Well, you know what this does do? Right. You know what this does do is it royally pisses me off. Yeah. Because I wanted Paramount to have this film. I'm not going to lie. I like Paramount Pictures.
Real quick, for you listeners that aren't familiar with the property, just let me give you a quick rundown before we really get into it about what this movie is. And I'll just give you a quick rundown from the book. It tells a real-life story of the Osage Native Americans in the 1920s. An outsider had found oil deposits under the land, and several wealthy Osage natives were murdered. And around the same time, the FBI was just being formed with J. Edgar Hoover at the helm. So they take the case, they look into it, try to figure out why these people are being murdered. And that's basically what it is, like this crime thriller.
I said, it pisses me off because I don't love the Apple TV situation. I think the streaming market is already completely overly saturated, and I felt like Apple TV was just one of those that could have gone by the wayside, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of Apple to begin with, so obviously I'm completely biased here. So let me start things off with that. So take my word with a grain of salt here. I don't like Apple. But for them to, obviously, this is a big play for them to get into the big time movie market and try to rival the likes of Amazon and Netflix, Amazon Prime and Netflix with their movie studios that they've obviously made something out of. I mean, Netflix has made a huge play in the feature film market, but I hope we still get a theatrical release of this. I'd be very devastated if we didn't.
That's what I was doing research on before we went live, and it looks like Paramount is now a partner. So they're not producing the movie. Apple TV is producing the movie, but Paramount is a distribution partner, which tells me that this could be getting a theatrical release, because why would Paramount be a distribution partner if they're not getting a theatrical release?
Well,
so
if that's the case, then I really don't give a shit who produces it, as long as they don't meddle with it and let Scorsese do his thing, because the man's a master. Exactly. I don't give a shit who produces it. I just want it to be in theaters so that I can watch it, because chances are I will not get Apple TV. I'm already subscribed to Netflix, to Hulu, to Amazon Prime, to Disney Plus. I don't even probably HBO Max at some point, because I want to watch the Snyder Cut of Justice League. And
for me at HBO Max, that mix ESPN Plus I'm subscribed to, because that came with the bundle with Disney. So
so I don't know how many more alphabet soups I'm going to be able to subscribe to. So
I think I'm done in terms of
I think I'm done
services.
too. So I don't think Apple TV is going to sway me here, unless they start just blowing everybody away.
I'll say if this wasn't getting a theatrical release, what I probably would have ended up doing is either, if they have like a free trial, just took advantage of that, or just subscribe for 1 month and canceled it. Just so I could watch it.
Maybe do that.
It's probably what I would have ended up doing.
What's the price point of Apple TV? Is it $15 a month?
I'm not sure, actually.
I'm not either. Either way, it's probably the price of a movie ticket anyway. So as long as there's no theatrical release, I might get it for a month and then cancel, just so I can watch it.
But you did bring up HBO Max, and they just launched this past week. Apple TV is $4.99 a month. You get a week-long free trial.
So a cheap movie ticket. A little matinee action. All right.
Yeah. But HBO Max launched with all the Harry Potter movies. They launched with the entire series of Fresh Prince, which I didn't know was happening.
I did see that, and I got so I literally I told my girlfriend right away. I was like, "We're getting HBO Max."
I've been watching Fresh Prince this week.
She goes, "Why?" I said, "Fresh Prince."
And they pried Friends away from Netflix, so they have entire series of Friends, and they've revamped the movie selection too. There's quite a few more movies than HBO initially had, because they partner with Warner Brothers and some other distributors as well.
HBO is gonna need another big series like Game of Thrones to really be a big player in the market again. And maybe we'll eventually see it. I don't know. I hope we do, because HBO is obviously they bring out good. They produce good stuff. I mean, they produce good shows. Obviously, Game of Thrones is a big one there. And they're starting to play the game a little bit more of that Netflix does, and bringing in some older sitcoms and some older shows that people loved. And what that says to me is that they're not only just here for a short time, they're here in this for the long haul, and they're looking to be one of the top streaming platforms that is a go-to. The fact that they're bringing in some of these older titles to be on their platform tells me that they're in this for a while now. So HBO Max is one that I'm definitely going to be getting at this point. If not just for Fresh Prince, then obviously the Snyder Cut of Justice League as well. So that's I'm excited for that too. So there is one other piece of news I wanted to mention to you, and I don't know if you saw this, but the director of the MCU, who is that? Kevin Feige?
Oh yeah, the creative head of the MCU.
Yeah, creative head of the
Feige.
Yep, creative head of the MCU. Recently, if I read this right, announced that the Marvel shows on Disney Plus are no longer going to be canon. Which I thought that was kind of interesting, because I know we talked about this in the past.
Why would that be? Because they're using the same actors from the movies.
Well, I think it was more of I'd have to reread the article, but I know that he said something about the Marvel shows not being canon any longer. And I know we've talked about it in the past of the shows having that they're putting on Disney Plus, having weight in the movies. And I personally did not like this route, because I felt like the shows just can't be as big and as good as the movies. It's too expensive to do it that route, and because of that, I feel like it takes away from what you could do in the movie, and I feel like it cheapened it out a little bit. So if this is the case, and I am reading things right here, which I can look it up just to be sure, but I obviously like it. It's an interesting route, because they did seem like they wanted to go this route, so I don't know for sure.
That's interesting.
But I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it. Okay, here it is. Previous MCU TV shows are not part of canon. That's what it was. Kevin Feige says previous MCU TV shows are not part of canon.
That makes sense.
That makes a lot more sense.
Which felt like separate endeavors anyway.
They did. So if you're wondering, that's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, Punisher. Those shows are no longer part of canon, which that makes a little more sense just based on the route that the MCU is kind of going at this point.
Yeah.
So, and I think that kind of falls in line a little bit here. I still wish that they would not make the freaking shows on Disney Plus canon, but that's just me. Again, I don't like the idea, and I never have.
You have Disney Plus, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can watch them either way. So
yeah, I know I can watch them either way. I just don't like the fact that they put weight, that they have weight in terms of the extended universe, and they can change the movies as a result. And I just don't like that idea.
It's an interesting concept though, because we've never seen that done where TV shows and movies tie in together.
It is a very interesting concept. I just feel like it's going to take away from some of the impact of the movies as a result. Yeah. That's all.
I feel you.
Especially if you miss an episode here or there, or you don't watch a certain season, or what if or honestly, what if the season is just bad? Like, what if you have a season that is just bad, and then you have to watch it to enjoy the movie?
Well,
that would suck.
I don't know for sure, but I would think it's not so heavily tied in where if you don't watch the show, you're not going to understand what's happening in the movie. I feel like they're probably just going to do little like nods here and there in the movies to make you understand.
Just kind of intertwine it a little bit, which fair enough. But if they are putting as much weight as to like it's important to watch the shows to fully be able to get the full experience of the movies, or you have to watch shows to get the full experience.
That'd be doing a lot. That'd be doing a lot.
That's too much in my mind. And again, if the show isn't great and you have to, and you still have to sit through it and watch it to fully experience the movies, that sucks.
Yeah,
I never want to have to feel like I'm forced to watch a show to watch movies that I love. That would suck.
Yeah, I feel you there.
And that's my biggest gripe about the whole thing is I don't want to be forced to watch a show to fully enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So
if it's too tied in, I think I'd agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, we'll only know by time will tell.
Yep.
Is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yep. So, but anyways, though, guys, that is going to close it out for this week's episode. We thank you guys for listening, as always. We hope you guys are all continuing to stay safe and stay healthy. And now that we're able to do a little bit more, hope you're getting outside and just enjoying yourself, provided you're staying safe and doing what you're supposed to do. But we wish all you guys the best. Thank you once again. We'll be back next week. This has been the Fan Report. Bye, fans.
For fans.
Once again, follow us on Twitter at RealFanReport. You can suggest topics, ask questions.
Just interact with us.
Whatever. We're always up there. We get the notifications to our phone. So,
yep.
But thank you guys again. And thank you to Detroit Sports Podcast as well. And especially a big thank you to Andrew for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
And we will see you guys next week. Have a good one.
Peace.